have your attention, let me, as co-chairman, welcome all of you to this annual dinner. In many ways, this is a dinner to honor the veterans of budget battles past. And there are some old veterans here tonight. There are some staff members here as well who worked on many of those battles in the past, and we welcome you. We also welcome the new disciples who are interested in trying to see if we can find budget discipline someplace. We welcome the members of Congress, both old and new. And I want to pay tribute to my co-chairman, Mitch Daniel, who couldn't be with us, and Tim Penny. Their support has been extremely important in working with the committee and in working with Maya. And I would appreciate it if you would pay tribute to Maya McGinnis for the tremendous leadership that she has provided. And I also want to thank the staff of the committee. It's a tremendous staff. It is a reservoir for the important knowledge that we have with regards to budgets, and they do a great job. And I want to thank all of them for continuing the fight for fiscal discipline. Look, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which, you know, we've all had the joke, it's a contradiction in terms. But the fact is that it's an over 40-year history of working and struggling to make the American people and the Congress aware of the dangers of fiscal irresponsibility and the importance of the courage that's necessary to do what is right for the sake of our children and for the sake of our future. When I was appointed director of the CIA, I was asked, what the hell does a budget guy know about intelligence? And I said that the fact is that budgets are about intelligence. Intelligence about the future, about what will happen if we fail, and what will happen if we succeed and do what is right. Like the intelligence area, we've had a mixed record. In my 50 years of public service, I often say that I've seen Washington at its best and Washington at its worst. The good news is that I've seen Washington work. And as a result, we had tremendous success. We fought deficits. We sat down and negotiated some tough budget agreements. We passed tough budgets. And frankly, because of the courage and the leadership of many in this room, we were able to achieve a balanced federal budget and a surplus, which is, I think, something all of us can be proud of in achieving. Look, the bad news is it's all gone to hell. We now have, you know, we thought we were out of the hole, and we thought that we would never get back in the hole. And now we're seeing a debt in excess of $22 trillion, a deficit now approaching $1 trillion a year. We see a 10-year path that will have the debt at almost 100%, in excess of 100% of GDP. And worst of all, we see a situation where neither party seems to care. I often tell the students at the Panetta Institute that in our democracy we govern either by leadership or by crisis. If leadership is there and willing to take the risks associated with leadership, then we can hopefully avoid crisis or certainly contain it. But if leadership is not there, and make no mistake about it, we will govern by crisis. And unfortunately, today we govern by crisis. There is no leadership willing to take the risks essential to a responsible and disciplined budget. Tonight, in all the chaos that is Washington, D.C. today, I think it's appropriate for us to pause to remember somebody that really represented leadership when it came to the budget. She was truly a budget hero. With the hope that remembering her will inspire leadership in others. No one was a stronger or tougher leader on the budget than someone we lost this last year, Alice Rivlin. I first met Alice over 40 years ago at the old Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. She was an assistant secretary for planning and evaluation when I was director of the Office for Civil Rights. And there I learned firsthand from her the Alice Rivlin Code of Conduct. When I lost my job, she was the first one who came up to me and said, "Thank you for the courage to do what was right, regardless of politics." And that, frankly, is the story of Alice Rivlin. As long as I've known her, she had the qualities of leadership, the qualities that represented what leaders in this town should be all about. And let me mention some of those important qualities. First, she always said, stand up and have the courage to do the right thing. And throughout her life, that's who she was. She fought for fiscal responsibility. She expressed strong views about the failure of political leadership to have the tough discipline necessary to do what was right. That is what made her an outstanding candidate to become the first director of the Congressional Budget Office. 1975. It was not easy. The Senate Budget Chair, Ed Muskie, recommended her appointment, but the House Budget Chair, Al Ullman, was strongly opposed to picking a woman. When Wilbur Mills, the chairman of Ways and Means, lost his job after jumping into the tidal basin with an Argentine stripper, Ullman took Mills' job, and the new chairman of the Budget Committee, Brock Adams, supported Alice for the job. She enjoyed reminding us that she owed her job to Fannie Fox. Secondly, Alice was somebody who always told the truth to power. She was honest with herself and she was honest with others. As a new member of the Budget Committee, when she was CBO director, I always admired her forthright testimony, telling committee chairmen and telling members of the committee what they should do. And here is this 5'2" Alice Rivlin at the witness table, and you could hardly see her head above the witness table. And she would be there basically giving hell to people like Rostenkowski, Jamie Whitten, Bob Jimo, Bob Byrd, and so many others, telling them about the importance of restraints on spending. Not easy. Thirdly, Alice was always about policy over politics. When President Clinton selected me as director of OMB, he and I both thought that Alice should be my deputy. She was tough, she was direct. We went through a prolonged budget process at the White House in the cabinet room, walking through every line item in the budget with President Clinton. Every line item. And she was there saying directly to the president, this program doesn't work, we ought to get rid of it, this program works, we ought to protect it. She had an opinion that she was not afraid to express at a time where we had to make very important decisions about what stayed and what went. I also had, when I became chief of staff, regular staff meetings every morning in which I invited Alice to participate as the new director of OMB. And in a room full of male presidential aides, she never hesitated to speak out. And we're talking about aides like, George Stephanopoulos, Emmanuel, Rahm Emanuel, Ickes, Bob Rubin, Summers, Erskine Bowles, myself, and she never hesitated to speak up to that group and express her views. She supported health care, but as many of you remember, health care had some budget issues that made it really tough, but she always stuck to her guns when it came to talking about the budget challenges that had to be faced. And lastly, let me say that she was somebody who always believed that you keep fighting and you never give up. Whether representing the District of Columbia, CBO, OMB, or the Federal Reserve, Alice kept fighting for what was right. She would listen to others. She was always polite. And she would work with students to try to give them a sense of what was right and wrong. Needless to say, she was someone who worked with this committee and was tireless in her efforts to make sure that the committee could fulfill its mission of trying to inspire others. Neither the president nor the leadership in Congress was prepared to deal with Alice Rivlin when she was telling them what the hell to do. That was the highest compliment for Alice. She never hesitated. And because she was so concerned about what was happening with the budget, she was working on a book on the issue of this town and what needed to be done on the budget when she died. Indeed, As Maya was telling me, she would say to people, "Don't bother me," when she was ill, because I got to work on this damn book and get it finished. Ladies and gentlemen, this nation will miss Alice. We'll all miss Alice. And we send our condolences to her family, the Winter family, and the Rivlin family. Washington will be a sadder place without her spunk, without her spirit, and without her will to fight. But perhaps if, as she did in the past, if she can be someone who is an example to others about the importance of leadership and the importance of the code that she established, then she will not be forgotten. Her code was fight for what is right regardless of politics. It is a lesson that our country needs now more than ever. God bless Alice Rivlin. She is a budget hero. And I pray that if there are deficits in heaven, God will have hell to pay.
Welcome, everybody. Wait. Oh, we need, okay. Okay, hi, everybody. Hi. I want to add my welcome to Leon Panetta's to everybody. I was looking at this crowded room. We've done this event in this room so many times, and I think we have set, usually at the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget these days, we're talking about how the record that we've set is that never before when the economy was this strong has the fiscal situation been this bad. And that's true, but I'm so pleased that the other record we've set is never before have we had a budget ball that was so filled with so many budget experts. So there's the good news. It has been a period, budget-wise, where we've actually felt it sometimes difficult to come up with good news, so thank you. I'm going to be brief. I'm just really glad that we have this event once a year that gives us an opportunity to thank the people in the budget community. And it's so neat. If you look through this whole room, all the people who are here, from the real leaders of the budget world who have been doing this for decades, years, on to the newest young staffers who are coming onto the Capitol Hill and learning more and more about the budget. And I think all of us know, whatever different role we play in budget world, that it is exhausting, tireless, generally thankless. It is not the kind of things that you get a lot of thank yous for trying to push the issues of fiscal responsibility in one way or another. But it is critically important. And it's nice to take one night a year and celebrate the whole budget community. So thank you very much to all of you for coming out tonight. I guess not to be too encouraging, because it's just not my shtick. But I think about all the members of Congress who came today and who came to the reception, and despite being on a really bad, and as Phil Swagel told us, fiscally unsustainable path, and how important it is that we make these changes sooner than later, there actually are a number of things that are going on in Congress. So despite the kind of, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, that's a bit of a punchline these days, there are a lot of efforts out there, which I think we're seeing is more and more encouraging. So just to think about a couple things, there's real progress that we're seeing on healthcare, and this is coming out of the Senate Finance Committee and the Health Committee, and a lot of ideas for cost savings, excuse me, that I think have, in an era where there is very little bipartisan support, the real potential for bipartisan cooperation. So let's all hope that we can make some progress on that. Do I love a dinner where controlling healthcare costs get applause, particularly from the healthcare expert table? And there's also the Joint Select Committee, which started a year ago. There's been a bunch of momentum since then, where there are a lot of members. Senator Whitehouse was here before. Senator Enzi is starting to put forth a really important effort on this. But budget process reforms that I think could make a tremendous difference. So that's another idea where we're seeing efforts. A lot of the freshmen in the House are picking up the mantle of PAYGO and pushing for it in a really meaningful way. So these are in some ways small efforts, but I think they're incredibly important that people are reawakening to the issue. And also to the many members who did join us for the reception tonight. We are excited when we see people taking brave votes and standing up for things, and we think about, we do fiscal heroes every other year. Many of you are the fiscal heroes. We are excited when we see the people who are taking the principled positions where we can reward the members who are actually making those hard choices, and many of you are here tonight, so thank you very much. I also want to thank our co-chairs. So Leon Panetta and Tim Penny and Mitch Daniels, who just wrote a note to me saying he's so sorry. He was super conflicted he wasn't able to come, but he just joined a new board. He didn't want to miss his board meeting. But our board of directors is tremendous. It is tremendous that people who have done so much for the country and worked on this issue and really represent what it is to be a leader in fiscal, but also exemplify bipartisan cooperation, give so much time and energy to this committee, and so they are throughout the room. I really want to thank our board members for all that they do for us. I also want to take a minute to announce a couple, not that new, but we have some of our newest board members with us. So Marjorie Margolis is here with us this evening. Janet Yellen is here with us this evening. Incredible contributions. And she's actually not a board member, but Cynthia Lummis was our shortest person who was on the board. She joined our board recently and then had to step down because she will be running for the Senate in Wyoming. But she was a great board member for the moment while she was there with us. Also, I would like to thank our sponsors. We have a number of you who have helped to underwrite this dinner. It makes a huge difference to us. Anybody, and there are many of you here who run nonprofits, know that the reason you get into running your organization has nothing to do with the love of fundraising. It is the least enjoyable part of any organization. And to the people who have helped us and underwrite, and I know that what we do, it's hard. It's not like directly helping anybody. It's sort of a public good or a good government thing in a way. So it's very hard to convince people that this is something they should support, but we really appreciate our sponsors. And there's a particular special thing that we're doing, which is we are, because of a lot of the support beyond the sponsors, including many of you who are here tonight, we are launching our Ed Lorenzen internship program to commemorate the great work of Ed Lorenzen. Last year, but Ed really was so reflective of the incredible work that tireless staffers do for the most principled of reasons, and we have such admiration for him. It's been a huge loss without him, and we're really pleased that we're able to launch that. Okay, so I'm going to quickly turn this over to the main event, but I just want to touch on a couple things that we're doing, because people keep saying to me and our staff, like, how do you keep doing this? The fiscal situation keeps getting worse. It is true. We have passed $4 trillion of new debt in the past couple Congresses. Like, it is hard to claim that we are winning. However, we do strongly believe that the importance of getting out impartial numbers, facts, analysis at a time like this is more important than ever. And actually, it's a moment where we feel like we're launching a number of projects that are making a difference. So I just wanted to quickly talk about 3 of them. One of them is US Budget Watch 2020, which we are launching tomorrow or the next day, very shortly, where we will do what we've done in past elections, but I think it will be even more important because we have so many people in the primaries. But we will analyze all of the people, or as many of the people as we can, who are running for president's policy proposals, both describe them, explain what they are. I mean, I think these explainers so people can follow the policy is critically important, but important for us, evaluate the bottom line and how those proposals affect the national debt. Because we all know that this is an asymmetric situation where people get huge reward for spending increases and tax cuts, and they aren't held accountable for the other side. We think it's critically important that in a time like a national election, this is part of the discussion. We will be doing as much as possible through US Budget Watch 2020 to make this part of the election. We're really excited to get started on that project, and it's going to keep us busy. There are a lot of different plans to look at. So that's one thing that Mark Goldwine, who you all know, who runs our policy shop, and our incredible policy team will be spearheading between now and the election. They will be very busy. The second project is a project called Fix Us, which many of you know about. Many of our colleagues who we work on these issues with are here, and my colleague Mike Murphy is running this project. This is the result of our being so convinced that there is really nothing we can do to fix the national debt as long as our governance structure is so broken. That this is no longer just a problem in and of itself, it is a symptom of a bigger problem. I think so many of us know it and feel it. And so in addition to all the work we're doing on the debt, we're doing a lot of work with Ipsos, trying to figure out what the root causes of, or how the problems that got us to this point are here, what we're going to do to bridge the divides and the divisions in this country, how we're going to build back trust in our institutions, trust in our leaders, and get us to a point where we're willing to make the hard choices that we know we need to do. And it's a heavy lift. It's an incredibly heavy lift. We're really glad that we're working with so many of the people who are in this room today on all of these projects. But it feels like, I think we all feel it, that it's a moment of incredible consequence for the country, and that this debt issue is in the middle of a bunch of broader issues, and we're launching a lot of exciting work in that area. And then third, just something I wanted to point out, we're doing a ton of work on SSDI, because while we spent many years thinking about going big and fixing the entire problem at once, it seems like there's plenty of openings for smaller, incremental policy changes that can actually generate ideas that are both good policy, generate savings, and get into the debate. So we've been working with the administration, we've been working with members on the Hill, we're about to put out our second set of papers and book on the issues of SSDI, and there's a whole lot of promise there. So much like healthcare, we are really encouraged that it seems like on the policy front there is a chance to kind of make progress. Okay, I'm now going to turn it over. That is like the most upbeat, encouraging talk I have given all year. So I think it's just good to be in a room with people who kind of understand why these issues all matter, despite that how difficult they are. One of the biggest challenges on all of this is the fact that we no longer are doing a good enough job on agreeing on facts, that the data is so complex, almost it seems like on purpose, to alienate us so that we can't follow the facts and figures, that evaluating, understanding, I mean, once you're talking about the worlds of baselines and getting from one baseline to another, you have lost, understandably, the entire country, except for those of us in this room. And so when I first saw Steve Ballmer's incredible new project where he is putting all of the data, and importantly, national, but also state and local, because we compartmentalize all of this in a very dangerous way. But he is putting this data out there, he is presenting it in a way that is accessible to people, and I honestly think that not only is this so important on the national debt, I think the project that he is going to talk to us about this evening is kind of a model of what we're going to have to do with policymaking more broadly. And if we can start to agree on the facts again as a country and use that at least as a starting point, I think we have a much better chance of making progress. So I'm really thrilled. I've been harassing Steve Ballmer to come and present something with us for quite some time. And I'm really thrilled that he's joining us tonight to talk to us about his great project, USA Facts. Thank you.
In the room for giving me a chance to talk. When Maya said, "You want to speak?" I was pretty pumped up. I'm not an economist. I don't live in DC. I don't know how to get anything done, but I care a lot about the deficit. So I said, okay, this will be kind of fun. And I thought I'd take the opportunity to share a perspective which is mine as a former business person and citizen, and give a little bit of perspective that might be helpful. But I want to start with a project in the context of a project that I started about four plus years ago called USA Facts. I had just retired from Microsoft. My wife grabs me and said, "Okay, it's time now, dude. You've got to get involved in our philanthropy." I was a little tired. I had been working hard at Microsoft for 34 years, and I said, no. My wife is focused in on foster kids and kids who are born into situations where they don't have much chance at the American dream. And I said, we don't need to worry about that. The government takes care of that. All we have to do is responsibly pay our taxes. And she kind of gave me this cynical look and said, come on, we can do better than that. Get to work with me. Well, as happens often in relationships, I said yes, and then passive-aggressively I said, I'm going to go prove that I'm right, that the government takes care of all this. And I set out on a journey to try to understand where government sources its money, where it spends its money, and what kind of outcomes it gets. That was kind of my focus. I sat down with my trusty search engine and started exploring all over the internet. It is really hard. It is really hard to find someplace where you can actually see some kind of consolidated numbers. Having just retired from a publicly held company, I said, well, shoot, I ought to be able to go read the 10K or the annual report. It turns out 2 years later, I did find that there's something called a 10K that's very hard to find. It doesn't really answer most of my questions, but it's a good piece of work that we wind up building off of at this time. And so I set out basically by myself initially, and now we have a team of about 10 people, plus a partnership with a group at Wharton, plus some web design firm to try to bring together the data. Now, what were our principles as we went through this? I wanted this to have the same kind of integrity that a corporation has to have when it presents its numbers. What does that mean? You just have to be factual, just the facts. Companies don't give forecasts in their 10K. It's all about what happened. What happened is nonpartisan. It's just what happened. Numbers are nonpartisan. They just are what happened. I wanted to just report the past. A lot of what you see is forecasts, and for every economist who will say food, there's another economist who will say bar. And it's hard to know who to believe if you're a citizen, but the history is not hard to believe. As a business person, I never believed anybody's forecasts anyway. Salespeople would always tell you it's going to go like this, boom, and then it's going to accelerate and life's going to be great. Sounds a little like the federal budget deficit. Revenue's going to hockey stick and life's good, touchdown. So he said, we're just not going to get in that game. We're not going to publish any forecasts. We will occasionally let Excel do a trend line through a bunch of history, and we'll tell you what Excel would have forecasted. But that's not a forecast. That's just an extension on trend line. Actually, my experience at Microsoft is Excel was a better forecaster than absolutely anybody else in the company. Everybody else wanted to be optimistic or pessimistic. Excel didn't have any of those predilections. We had to be comprehensive. I decided earlier on we had to put federal, state, and local data together, because nobody in the wilds can tell you who does what. Who paid for that road? If you ask most people who paid for the roads they drove on the way to work today, they couldn't tell you if it's federal, state, or local. When it comes time to even K through 12 education, you say who paid for it? Nobody knows who paid for it. Medicaid's impossibly hard to understand. It works differently in different states in some ways. So we just said, let's add it all up, because you want to see the total tax burden, you want to see the total expense, and the total benefit. How good are our roads? That's a state, local, and federal challenge. So we made the thing comprehensive. We try to make this stuff comprehensible. I think outside, we have 2 documents. You can pick them up if you like. This is just like a corporation would do, an annual report on government in the US. It's got pretty pictures and that kind of stuff in it. This is a 10K. Businesses have to write these for the Security and Exchange Commission. They're dense, they're hard to read, but they really tell you a lot about what's going on. And we produce one of these, same format as a corporation would have to produce, to try to give that same thoroughness. Comprehensive, comprehensible, and contextual. You have to give people context. My favorite is when people say we're going to save the deficit by cutting the foreign aid budget. There's so many things wrong in that, as people in this room know, and yet it's important, therefore, to give context, to show what A looks like in the context of B, let alone the fact that a big share of our foreign aid budget actually goes to our military allies, and people don't recognize that either. But how do you surface the data and put it out there? We said we'd use only government data. No think tank, no this, no that. A business in its 10K has to publish its data. It doesn't say, what does somebody say about me? It's, what do I say about myself? Now, I'm a big believer that we have good, strong, hardworking people who work in our statistical agencies, whether it's Census, BLS, BEA. We use sources. We actually use data sourced from over 100 different government databases to try to make sense of the government. It's great that people publish all the data. It's hard to access, and it's even harder to understand. But we use actual government data in assembling our report. The one other thing a business has to do is it has to organize itself into segments and explain its pieces. When I was at Microsoft, we had to explain Windows versus our Office business. Those are separate concepts. We had to say, okay, well, what are the segments of government in the United States? We just turned to the Constitution. The preamble says, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. Well, that's kind of like a segment. Provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. And then in each of these areas, we created sub-segments just to give some understandability, some comprehensibility to the data. That's the project we set on. We've now published 3 annual reports and 10Ks. We have a website. We encourage you to go visit. In fact, you aren't going to be able to read my slides tonight anyway, but there are table cards here, and they have the URL at usafacts.org where you can find stuff. USA Facts, I can't even say it's a not-for-profit. I just pay for it. And we have to set it up so that that is a tax-deductible item. I don't want any view of partisanship. So I pay for it with after-tax money, not pre-tax money, just to keep it outside the bias of people. Now, you can worry about me if you want to. The one thing I will assure you is I am a numbers guy, even if I'm not an economist or anything else. I love numbers, and I would never dishonest the accuracy of the numbers that we can find. I will tell you, by the way, different government agencies sometimes report the same data differently. That's a problem that should be worked on. I do think it would be important to try to provide our statistical agencies, not even with more economic support, but the ability to work together more as one. I love how the GAO works. where it is protected. The Comptroller General is a position that's appointed for 10 years in a bipartisan way. I think our statistical agencies should get the same kind of support. There should be something where nobody in the country can say, we don't believe that data about what's going on. I can find it completely unacceptable to hear any politician say they don't believe government numbers. I would say if you don't believe them, damn it, then fix them. Make sure you can believe in their accuracy. I'd even go so far as to say we ought to get every government official, just like a CEO has to sign, these numbers are correct, and if not, I go to jail. That's kind of the signature the SEC makes you give for all intents and purposes. Make every executive branch leader, make every congressman and senator sign. These numbers are accurate to the best of my knowledge, and I bet those numbers would get really good really fast. So that's the context of what we've done. That's sort of the perspective I bring to the discussion. And I'm not going to purport to be an expert. I'm just going to give you some reactions based upon having waded through government numbers in quite some depth over the course of the last 4 years. Nobody here needs this slide, but it must be put up. It must be put up. What has happened with the deficit? What has happened with the debt over the time period going back to 1980? We do inflation adjusted on most of our stuff, so you can take a look at it and understand. We know this is a problem. And you would not be in this room if you didn't know it is a problem. We are nonpartisan at USA Facts. I like the idea of a balanced budget myself. That's just the businessman in me. I don't consider that partisan. I will wear that on my sleeve. But the numbers we present are just the numbers. And we think this is on your table card, actually, if people are interested. It shouldn't be that interesting to anybody who cares about the deficit. That's kind of the starting point. As a business person, with a bunch of numbers provided by government, how do I think about the problem? And I'm not saying this is implementable in DC. I'm just telling you how I think about the problem. Number one, let's agree on what the goal is. What are we working to in terms of deficit? Is the answer really zero? Are we trying to make sure that we always have a certain coverage ratio over interest expense based on revenue? Are we trying to make conservative assumptions? Productivity, GDP per capita, per person, inflation adjusted, almost predictably has grown over the years at about 0.5% a year, the number or less in the last several years. You decide whether you want to make wild forecasts or not. I wouldn't, but people can get to decide that. And then just say, agree on the goal. It's okay for us to have a debt of 50% of GDP. It's okay if interest payments are 7%. And in this case, I'm focusing on the federal budget. The states do a pretty good job, by the way, of breaking even. But there's a deep, dark secret I learned about that, actually. The deep, dark secret is there's all kinds of ways for the state to move their losses to the feds. So if the state can't cover its costs, I guess it's unemployment insurance. There's a bunch of these things where the states run out, they just push it to the feds. Another reason to look at this on an integrated basis. What's the goal? If we just take it as a balanced budget for purpose of today, maybe that's good context. The second thing I think is you have to agree on the quota. How much, this is how we do it at Microsoft. Fixed costs are X, how much money are we taking out of fixed costs? Variable cost, or revenue is Y, what's going to happen to revenue, and then what's going to happen to what I would call the variable costs. And then it's not really hard math. It's kind of like an A plus BX. Fixed cost plus the amount per unit times the number of people, and you kind of are there. Now, I know I'm over-trivializing, but that's part of the point. If we're ever going to get people in the population at large to engage in this, we have to be able to make it simple without making it simple stupid. If it gets simple stupid, it's not that helpful either. And finding the right balance for this or any other discussion that involves government numbers, I think is very important. Oops, I double clutched. Okay. This is a map, 2016, because the last year in which you can pull together federal, state, and local tax revenue data is 2016. Shame, 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 shame. The federal numbers are more recent, but the state and local are not. And you can see kind of the pot. Keep the federal deficit out of your mind, that big black blob on the right. Just hold that for a moment. The tax revenue that comes from the federal government is in hash. The tax revenue that comes from the states is not hash. You aren't going to be able to read this. If you want to read it, go to the USA Facts WAC Debt website. But what you can say is, wow, that federal deficit, that really looks big in the comparison of all tax revenue collected by all jurisdictions in the U.S. We used the 2018 federal deficit, even though we don't have tax revenue that recently, but it helps give you perspective. Again, everybody in the room sort of knows that, but when you put it in the context that everything everybody pays, if you look at it in the context of spending, government spending, there's that big fat deficit, again in the upper right, and you can look at, we have this color-coded, promoting the general welfare, blah, 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 that's for us. But it gives you a sense. The federal deficit is about the size, a little less, because we're numerical people. It's $779 billion compared to a total education spend of $862 billion. It's mind-blowing. But we need pictures to help put things into context for people. I think, and I show this to my wife, this makes sense. If we talk about some number, 779 billions, trillions, no citizen can distinguish the fact that a billion is 1,000 millions, and that a trillion is 1,000 billions. The number of people who can actually get that intuitively in their system is small. Therefore, we need to provide some pictures and visualizations that bring this stuff alive. So what are the tools we have to cut the deficit? Again, this is businessman style. We have these fixed costs. I call them fixed costs because they don't vary in the number of people we have. The defense, and I call it the common defense for the Constitution. That's where you find the defense budget, the veterans budget, foreign affairs, immigration. We have our transportation and public health. Then there's everything else except the debt. I kept the debt out of here because until we do something in this room, the debt's not going to go down anyway, therefore interest payments aren't going to go down. And if you look at the other $367 billion, you know what the biggest next piece is? Retirement benefits to federal employees. Probably not one this group is going to rush to cut tomorrow, but I highlight it and underscore it for purposes. So there's 1.3 trillion in fixed costs. You sit there and say, okay, how much could we get? This is how I think about the system. You could say it's way oversimplified, but I would say, hey, agree on a quota. Then you'd say, okay, where can we actually gain efficiencies? I look at the federal budget, I look at any of the spend by government, and I say, look, if you can't get efficiencies in healthcare, because people want to say the screws are too expensive in the airplanes and blah, 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 and they might be. We're not salvaging our deficit by going after screws in airplanes. You have to say, where's the biggest efficiency you could look to get, and it is in healthcare. When I say efficiency, I don't want to take coverage away from anybody. That's another policy decision that could be made. I don't want to change covered treatments. It's just how would you reduce healthcare spending? Well, what you do in regular companies is one of two things. You either just cut the rate you're willing to pay. Just cut it. Cut the Medicare rate. Cut the Medicaid rate. People, I know that's politically like, whoa, but if you want efficiency, it's there. Or you could say, how do we restructure, because government regulates the healthcare industry and could regulate for efficiency. How do we change the structure of the healthcare industry to deliver what it delivers today at lower cost? It is an industry that certainly has seen no productivity improvements. I'm not going to spend any more time on healthcare. Suffice it to say, I don't see another big bucket where you could find efficiencies. And then everything else affects the standard of living. How much tax do you pay, and what kind of transfers that you get? And the fundamental problem, I think, in many senses is nobody wants to affect anybody's standard of living. And yet, when you look at the numbers, between federal tax revenue of 3.2 trillion, transfers of 2.5 trillion. That 5.7 trillion is obviously the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge to making progress. How do we live? What I show here, and you can take a look at it, is if you're in the top, because if you want to affect transfers or taxes, you got to say who. Who are we trying to reduce the transfers to? Who are we trying to get more tax revenue from? The top 0.1%, 0.1 to 1%. We put all the data on here. This is the year 2000. Why is the year 2000 interesting? So last year we had a surplus. You can say, gosh, we had 121 million tax filers that year. You can see about what the income, about what the transfers are, about what the taxes are. If you fast forward and say, and again, you're not going to see this all, so stick with me on the point. The incomes haven't changed much. Not at any one of these income levels. What's changed is taxes are down and transfers are up. It's as simple as that. We now have 149 million filers, but taxes are up, transfers are down, incomes are flat. It's not that hard. It's just not that hard. It really makes it, and we actually have a budget deficit calculator going up on our site on September 25th that'll match what I'm about to show you. I'll show you in just a minute. It's interesting, these slides worked on the other monitor quite well, but I used to work on PowerPoint, so I'm supposed to observe when things don't come out the way I intended. I can be embarrassed either on behalf of our PowerPoint people who are great, or PowerPoint, which we used to develop, so I'm going to feel bad about PowerPoint right now. But you can also ask the question, if we're talking about how people live, you may want to look at how different types of people live. Single people, single without kids. The number of people, if you just look at the two brown boxes, that represents the number of the percentage of people in a category in the bottom 40%. Single, no kids, you have a lot of people living in the bottom 40%. Single with kids, you have even more people who live in the bottom 40% by income. Married, no kids, hardly anybody lives in the bottom 40%. Married with kids, people don't live in the bottom 40%. And then the elderly do live in the bottom 40%. Now, this is based upon market income, pre-transfers. But the problem we have is the elderly is growing as a percentage, and so are people who are single without children. So two of the least affluent groups, people who are single with kids, is actually declining, much to my surprise. Now, why is this important? Because the way you might want to play with taxes and transfers might be different for different people. This is the spreadsheet I was going to talk about. You just write down how much income do people make, how much taxes do they pay, how much do they receive in government transfers, and sort of the way they get to live is their market income, plus their transfers minus their taxes. Now, some economists could say, oh, that's not quite right in some way, but at the level in which I could explain to somebody else, that's my lifestyle. And you can see it for various income brackets. And what our calculator will do is just say to you, hey, I want to create a quota. How much pain do we want to put on people in different income brackets? How much pain? This is not government policy. It's just a statement of a quota. If we could get $450,000 more per year out of people who make average $8.6 million, and if we could get them to give up $3,773 of transfer, then we would recover 10.2% of the overall budget deficit. And you just do it and say, what I would do as a legislator, nobody will ever do this. I just say, who are we going to inflict how much pain on? I'd get everybody in the Congress to write down fill in their own little spreadsheet about how they want to distribute the pain. I'd hand it back to everybody. We could look at them in aggregate and say, this is the sense of the room. I don't care whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Everybody who says they have any interest in coming close to balancing the budget should have a perspective on this. This is a scenario. This is not a forecast. This is not my desire. It's just a scenario that would get us to a balanced budget. These numbers aren't crazy. You look at them this way, they're not crazy. You may think they're crazy, but nothing looks completely ridiculous in the context of how people live today. Here's another scenario which is far more progressive, if you will, puts more of the burden on more affluent people. In this case, you can see that essentially all the burden is borne by the top 20% by income. One of the things people often don't think, but which we really dramatize in USA Facts, for a family, a tax filer, to be in the top 20% takes how much money, would you guess? It's about $120,000. So if a family makes $120,000, they're in the 20% of richest people in the country. I mean, it's stunning to most people. I mean, the New York Times doesn't get that, with respect to the New York Times. The New York Times ran a piece recently about the middle class, except 4 out of 5 of the people they talked about actually made over $120,000 a year. That's the upper class. The middle class, or the middle, if you will, 20%, makes between $33,000 and $63,000 a year. Pre-transfers, pre-taxes. If you add those things in, they have $52,736 worth of living power. By the way, the government, you can see it in our reports, government will also tell you what they spend it on. I can't remember which agency provides the data, but there's a survey done maybe by Census that'll show you how people spend their money. It's survey data, but it's government survey data. So you can match up and think about all of these things. That's kind of the situation. 33 to 63,000. You decide how much punishment you want to put on these people. Again, I'm not arguing for one point of view or another, and I hate using the word punishment, but at the end of the day, that's the problem. People are going to view whatever you do, either in tax increases or transfer decreases, it's punishment. And yet, I think it's important to decide whether we're going to try to take the deficit down. How much do we need to affect people's standards of living? And whose standards of living do we want to affect the most? Just make the decisions. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. You guys have to deal with all that every day. But at the end of the day, if we don't have a roadmap of what we're trying to do, and then somebody can decide whether this is wealth taxes or raising the ceiling on payroll taxes or cutting Social Security or getting Medicare under control, to me that's kind of a detail almost, until you decide who's going to take the impact. And up front, decide what you want to do with fixed costs and whether you think you can get any efficiency in healthcare, and then move on. I came here kind of as a representative of the numbers. We do have outside for you our annual report. We do have our 10K. If you take a look at them, great. If you don't, we don't make any money doing this anyway. What we try to do is help educate the population, but in the context of everything I've learned about the numbers and what we're going to try to make available to people, we won't make a forecast. That's not what we're doing. We're just saying, who should we go get? Who should pay for a balanced budget? Every citizen should decide. They should be educated with the numbers, and then we move forward from there. Appreciate your time tonight. Thank you again, Maya.
Thank you. Before I invite you all to join us for dessert and reception in the room across the way, Steve, we're going to do more to connect this work to all the people in this room and around town, because I just think there's so much that you can do in terms of presentation and getting people to understand and connect these numbers. So really appreciate that. Before I invite everybody to come for a dessert reception, I do want to do the most important thank you, which is to the remarkable staff of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. They really work unbelievably hard at everything we do. I'd love it if they would all stand up. And I also want to thank particular, who brought this entire dinner to all of you tonight and endured a whole lot of stress, mainly from me, but from everybody in our organization. Chris Rotella, who's standing right there, did this entire thing. So Chris, it's time for you to have a drink, and everybody, we hope you'll join us for a dessert reception across the way. Thank you so much for coming.